The hills and moorlands around Loch lie almost entirely on lava, resulting from volcanic eruptions 300 million years ago. The Ice Age influenced the shape of the hills, leaving in its wake a rocky, barren and frozen landscape. The subsequent development of vegetation culminated in the emergence of trees such as birch, hazel and Scots pine. In prehistoric times, the forest was cleared by early man in order that the land on the upper reaches of the River Calder could be used for grazing and cultivation of crops.
The Celts knew an awful lot about working with metals and jewellery, and they had all the materials that they required there at the side, and they built those wonderful round houses which can be seen, well, the foundations can be seen way up in Muirshiel, but you can also see a reconstruction of one. They were highly civilized people, although they don't get the name of being that at all. But one thing they have left is the language. Many of the names round about are Celtic names. The name of our place, Loch is, for example, the Calder, the rivers. They were some of the early names round about, and even the names of the farms were also Celtic.
High above the banks of the Calder lie the ruins of the old Baritis mine.
The first seed that confronted my father and I when we arrived at the old Muirshiel mine was the fact that the old men who had worked it before had only open casted the vein. Now the vein was a fair width, so they would get a good amount of stuff. The sides, the hanging wall side, was very, very friable and had collapsed into the gully that they had left. Now this was most unusual because we'd been in the habit of dealing with really solid hanging walls, and it was the first indication we got that they might be troublesome.
The first records of Muirshiel are actually of a farm which lent its name to Muirshiel. Muirshiel meaning simply a shieling on the moor, shieling being a summer farm. Later on, Queen Victoria set a trend for shooting lodges when she built Balmoral in 1855. The first records of Muirshiel are slightly later than that, in the early 1870s, but Muirshiel itself was just a shooting lodge, occupied originally during the summer, where people came to shoot game. Game in those days meant a bit more than just grouse. Things such as snipe and curlew, which aren't shot today, were shot. But in 1970, they opened Muirshiel Country Park, the second country park in Scotland, during European Conservation Year. Many of the paths and some of the clearing of things like rhododendron round about that time was done using local volunteers, a tradition which is still continued to this day. A ranger service was set up which provided guided walks and worked with local schools to provide educational visits either to the park or to schools.
Well, the traditional woodland crafts can go back over 4,000 years or more. Some of the people that worked in the woodlands and the crafts they done, bodging was one, and the bodger made chair legs and a few spindles and the stretchers, so he didn't do any other part of the chair except for the chair legs, and a bodge job was an unfinished job, unlike a botch job which was a bad job. So the bottomer made the chair seat, the framer put everything together, so it could be 3, 4, even 5 people involved in making a chair, but the bodger specifically was the chair legs. Before we can use the pole lathe, there's certain series of sequences you go through. First time you get your log of wood, which is freshly felled, so you're using green wood, lots of moisture content in it, so even though it's a hard wood, it's still quite soft. So the sequence of working with the wood is you get your log of wood, cleave it down into sections, use a side axe, you could be right-handed axe or left-handed axe, to dress the wood off to give you a round shape, a rough cylinder shape, and then it goes onto the shave horse.
Once the wood's been pared down by the side axe, we then put it onto this apparatus here, which is called a shave horse. And you'll notice it's a piece of wood here, more or less like a clamp, that we clamp the wood onto. It's got 3 legs, and the reason why it's got 3 legs is so that we can put it on uneven ground when the wood's been working within a wooded area. So all we're doing now is just thinning off the wood, making it nice and round in preparation for putting it onto the pole lathe. And what I'm doing just now, as I'm doing this, I'm looking at the end of the wood to get a nice rounded finish at the end.
As the Calder passes Clovenstone, it undergoes a sudden change of character. From being an open moorland river, it flows into a deep gorge, unseen by the passer-by. Down the centuries, the rocks have been sculptured into strange, almost alien shapes.
I was never lucky so far as big fish were concerned, but as a boy you were always more or less guaranteed an 8-inch fish, and they always seemed to be in great condition. And it's many thanks to the gentlemen who formed the club way back in 1927, and I can remember them well, the Gemmels, Jimmy and Andy, and Willie McClure, John Young, a relation of mine, Davy Andrew, he was a keen fisher. And these men, they stocked the river, and the tradition was to put 2,000 trout below the falls, 1,000 trout above the falls. And I'm standing in the Cloak Burn, and they stocked it as well, right up to the Boghead Dam. And it certainly, as boys, gave us some great fishing.